Welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your evening. I know strange times for everyone right now, and we'd all like to be maybe out there training and stuff like that. But obviously, times mean that we can't right now. So we're looking at putting on these webinars and stuff to give you your running fix whilst you're having limited abilities to get out there and train. So this is the first in the 4 series sessions that I'm doing on ultra running. So my name's Darren Reevell, as the slide says. I'm the event group lead for ultra running and a regional coaching lead for endurance in the north. So what are we going to cover? It's going to be pretty straightforward. There's going to be a little bit of housekeeping, just a quick chat on learning objectives or outcomes, a quick overview of what ultra running is really, where we can do it, what we need to do, just a discussion around it's more than just marathon training, some recommendations of things where you can find races and so on and so forth, opportunities for international events, and really what's next, where we'll talk a bit about the up and coming sessions and seminars. That's what we're going to cover here, and then at the end is going to be a bit of a Q&A. So it's going to be a relatively quick session tonight. It's probably looking around about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes. So I'm going for the slide deck, and then we'll do answer some of the questions that you guys and girls out there pop on as we go along. So that's kind of the format really. So a bit of housekeeping at the start, straightforward kind of stuff really. You try and find a quiet place if you can. I know it's hard in this day and age now. Certainly in my house, I've got my kids bouncing around the walls right now because they're kind of getting fed up of being indoors. Make notes if you need to, ask questions. Don't stress too much if you miss some points. These will be, I believe they're being recorded, and they will be reviewable again at some point upon the Athletics Hub or somewhere like that. And attendees will probably get a link to this anyway coming out from this. So don't worry if you don't really catch everything on this. It's pretty straightforward anyway. We're not going to go massively in depth. We're just going to scrape the surface in this particular session. And then the following 3 sessions will go into greater detail really. So let's have a look at this. So let's get in this. So the first kind of session is, let's have a look. I've skipped one slide too far. So learning outcomes. What is ultra running? That's what we're looking to know. Probably a lot of you folks already know what it is. Some options around that, some essential and sort of information around ultra running, some basics around training, what you need, and again, like I said, international team opportunities. So pretty straightforward really, nothing too complicated to kind of go through tonight, I think. Like I said, it's just really scratching the surface. So for those that can't hear, I think Spencer's in the chat there, and he'll help you through that. I know we've seen in the past 1 or 2 individuals have had challenges with the audio. Sometimes logging out and back in helps, or maybe logging on an alternative device, a phone or a tablet can sometimes work. I know 1 or 2 have had problems with that in the past, and just check maybe your settings on your device that you're logged on to. So, okay, what is ultra running? I'm guessing most of you probably know what it is anyway, but we're going to go for it because we're just going to cover the basics today. So as I put on that first bullet point, it's really any race that is longer than a marathon. But of course, it's becoming widely popular now, and we're seeing lots of people aspiring to be ultra runners, and the options available to the ultra runner out there now are very wide and varied. So the complete novice or the seasoned campaigner can find pretty much any kind of options available to them that they may like. So if you're into road, trail, track, hills, flat, multi-day events, hot, cold, anything in between, there will likely be an option that can satisfy your wants and needs. And that's the beauty of ultra running really. And it's also a very inclusive community, particularly for people that maybe when they first get into that and they're a little bit nervous, they think, well, it's going to be full of all of these crazy bearded men running around. It's often not that way, far from that, to be fair. It's not all like Barkley marathons. It tends to be very inclusive and very welcoming of newbies and novice runners. So really, from an ultra running perspective, we have an embarrassment of riches. We can really take any kind of event we want to. I think what we always say for the novice or the new ultra runner, somebody who's maybe just stepping up from a marathon, really, is that we generally recommend that you try one of the shorter distance races first. Because the jump up from a marathon can be quite significant, particularly when you go to the longer events. So normally we would recommend a new runner, a novice, to maybe go for a 50k or a 30 miler, or maybe a 6-hour sort of endurance race. They're the kind of ideal ones that the novice runner gets, really, and it enables them to have a good check it out, see if they like it first, I suppose, test out things like nutrition, hydration, and experience an ultra race in sort of a low-key, low-risk kind of format, although 50k is still quite a long way, as we'll know. So unlike a lot of road races, the options with ultra running, so we have a wide variety of surfaces and kind of formats that we run in. Like I said, we've got trails, we've got road, we've got track, desert trails, and we've even got, I think there's even an ultra race in Antarctica for those people that are really that crazy to go for that. So really, whatever your preferences are, you're going to find an option for you out there, and I think that's one of the key things that we have to sort of look at in relation to how your running is. What's your preferences in there? So if you're a hardened road racer, you might not be so keen to go into a trail race, but again, if you're a trail runner, you're going to absolutely adore that trail race, and you're probably going to hate doing 100k on the road. So there's lots of options available to you out there, really, is what we're saying on that first kind of slide. So again, what do we need? Well, I put 4 bullet points there, and they're pretty straightforward in my mind, and I guess a lot of you folks probably would kind of realize that and agree with most of this anyway. So it depends upon the event, but I think the 4 key things that we need is fitness, nutrition and hydration, suitable clothing, and suitable gear. So let's dig into these just a little bit more. So when we talk about fitness, really, we want to make sure that you're well prepared to run that race or to take on that challenge. We don't want the dreaded DNF in there. So when I talk about fitness, I'm talking really about your sort of cardiovascular fitness, the ability to utilize the oxygen and have an efficient running economy by having a good aerobic and cardiovascular fitness. And that's really what we're looking at in that kind of stuff. We need to build a good big engine for that. So the more oxygen you can take in and deliver and process to your working muscles, the better. So it's quite an important part of that, really. And one of the things with ultra running is a lot of the workouts aren't particularly sexy. It's not going to set your Instagram account on fire if you post your latest run on there. And probably many people would say your bread and butter runs are pretty quite boring because it tends to be steady aerobic kind of working, really. So in terms of nutrition and hydration, well, firstly, arguably probably most importantly, this is where you need to train your gut. So you can have the best aerobic engine out there, but it won't help you one bit if you run out of your fluids, your calories, you start getting some gastrointestinal issues in there, and you end up having to pull out of the race. So this is something that's key part of your training and needs to be really factored into your training, and how, what, and when, and how much you eat and drink. It can be trained in your training runs. So we always recommend that basically you tweak your training runs around or you do your nutrition with your training runs to support that, and you test it. And then you evaluate how successful it was, and you make some adjustments if needed, and test again, and repeat that process until you get it right. And of course, these are going to change based upon the actual events you're talking about. The longer the event, the more complicated some of the requirements of your fluid and nutrition can be. So a 6-hour event or a 30-miler, the nutrition demands of that are significantly different to, say, a multi-day event or a 100-miler or a long trail run that maybe takes you the race across Scotland, for argument's. So the nutritional demands of those two are very different. So you need to practice a lot of that in your training, because the key thing is that you will find, hopefully, any issues that can affect your potential performance on the day will come out in your training. That's where you can adjust your nutrition and hydration and then amend and test again. And it's really a kind of a repeated process in your training. And of course, what works well for one race may need to change again, because as human beings, we tend to evolve and change our preferences as well. So you might find that what worked for you last year may not work so well this year, based upon lifestyle factors and so on and so forth. So in terms of clothing, it needs to be obviously suitable for the race you're competing in. So some races will have some very strict demands around what kind of clothing you need to wear. You maybe have to carry a waterproof covering if it's out maybe somewhere on the moors or a sort of hilly trail run. Of course, if it's a track race, you're going to need just basically standard kind of running gear. You know, you're not going to have the same challenges around having clothing and that. But a lot of them, obviously, they do tell you when you register the kind of requirements that you need in your in your race, really. And a lot of it's just making sure that you have the right gear, because what you don't want to be is, you know, stuck there in, say, a 24-hour race and find it's 3 in the morning and you've left your waterproof cover behind, and it's getting very cold and very rainy, and you're feeling very poorly because of that. So these are things that, you know, you need to factor into that. And again, you need to factor that into your training as well. So if your race does have some specific requirements around clothing, you need to make sure that you actually practice that in your training as well, because again, you don't want to find that actually you wear a particular jacket or a top and it gives you a nasty rub point, and suddenly you find that actually, you know, you're 18 hours into a race and you're in a lot of pain because you didn't particularly cover up a rub point or address that beforehand. So these are things, really basics kind of things that we go through that I'd expect runners to test out during their training, really. Again, when we talk about gear, you know, here we're talking about things like footwear, poles if needed, head torches, camelbacks, nutrition belts, spare batteries for head torches. These are the kind of things we're talking about, and again, it needs to be appropriate for the event. So, you know, if your event is an off-road multi-day event, you're going to need trail running shoes, nutrition belts, camelbacks. You're probably going to need some emergency kit just in case. You'll probably certainly need a head torch and a spare battery if you're going you know, a multi-day event, because you're likely to be going through the night or when it's dark. Whereas a 50k on the track, it's pretty straightforward. You can just rock up in your running gear, all your hydration you can, you know, and nutrition you can pretty much put on the on a table at the side of the track, and off you go and repeat your laps. So again, you know, you need to think about that, you know, to make sure you've got the right gear for the events that you're actually running in there. I hope that kind of makes sense to you. So let's flip onto that. So as I kind of alluded to earlier on, you know, it is more than just marathon training. So, you know, a lot of you out there have probably done marathons before, and of course, you know, we hear about hitting the wall, and many people hit it, many people don't. Most people start to struggle anywhere from between, depending on the level of fitness, anywhere between 16 miles right up to 22 miles. Now, we can kind of tough it out in most cases. You know, if you get to 22 miles, you can sort of tough it out and say, okay, you know, I've got there now. I've got the last 4 miles to go, just over the park run. I can just tough this out now and get through it. Of course, that's pretty straightforward to tough that out. But when you're suddenly talking about, say, a 50k, so you're suddenly talking about, actually, maybe I've got 10 more miles to go and I'm absolutely exhausted. You know, that's where the real difference is, I think, when we see in ultra running. So it's not just marathon training that we're doing. It's, you know, with a little bit longer runs, for argument's sake. You know, we need to consider that this event is going to feel considerably much more difficult towards the end than it would be in a marathon. So you can't just kind of wing your nutrition, and you can't just wing your training. You've got to put some thoughts into that. I'm not saying you can do that with a marathon anyway, but, you know, for a lot of people, will tough it out in that last sort of 10k, 5 miles, 5k. You certainly would be struggling to do that if you was hitting with 8 miles to go or 10 miles to go, and you were certainly finding it, you know, you'd bonked then and you were struggling. It's a long way to go, that last 10 miles, if you really are struggling. So when we talk about, you know, the key components, well, of course, I spoke earlier about the good aerobic engine, having a good cardiovascular system, and it's more than just long, slow distance or miles, in my mind. You know, we do have to be specific, though, and we also have to, I guess, also consider the individual's own wants, needs and goals for that particular racer and their previous experience, for argument's sake. So if you're a novice runner and you're looking to do your first 50k, you could probably just focus primarily on building that cardiovascular base. So you could just be about your long, slow distance and your last 10 miles, getting those miles in the legs, building that aerobic base up there. Whereas if you're more advanced and you're a competitor in there, so you're looking to try and maybe get a podium finish, or you're looking for a specific time, then you might want to throw in a little bit of speed work into that. But again, it needs to be appropriate. Now, what kind of speed work are we talking about? I'm not referring to those long, fast reps of, you know, 400-meter reps. Now, sure, they're fun to do sometimes, but I think for most people, when we get to those kind of long runs, we really want to push that lactate turning point. So we do a lot of sort of longer sort of lactate tempo based type intervals, you know, so that would help you improve that lactate turning point and therefore improve your running economy and then be able to run faster for the same effort. So that's what we'd kind of talk about there. Now, should we run the full distance? I would say probably not for most people, because you know it becomes a lot of diminishing returns. If you're running a 50k and you start to train your long runs that you are running 50k, you know the recovery from that is probably going to take you out from any quality training for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So you have to consider that, really. You know, so what we'd say for most people is, you know, get some good quality, used to being fatigued. So, you know, you might get those double days. We'll talk about that in a second. But we wouldn't certainly want to have people running, you know, super long distance, 50Ks, 100Ks in your training run. Some people would argue that they might well do that, and that's their own choice. But I think we have to consider the potential recovery from such runs and how much damage or impact that has on your ability to train in the following weeks after those kind of runs. So you have to consider that if you are one of those people that tries to run really long. Now, there's a lot of discussions around consecutive days. I'm a fan of that, but it needs to be done in a controlled way. So if you go out every weekend and you run 20 miles on Saturday and 30 miles on Sunday, well, pretty quickly you're going to find yourself getting very fatigued. You need to make sure that if you are doing those consecutive long runs on back-to-back days, that you ensure you have plenty of recovery. So maybe every second or third or worst fourth week, having a week where you don't run back-to-back days, or if you do, you drop the mileage significantly, so you allow your body to recover a little bit. Because what will happen if you just go out there and run those 20 and 30 mile back-to-back days every week after week after week, well, sure, you'll gain some cardiovascular fitness, but you then start to take too much out of the body, which will mean then they really are struggling to recover. And again, you might find that when it comes to race day, and it's that final time where you want to go to the well and pull that performance out, your body then turns around to you and says, actually, I'm too tired to give you this now. We've done it all in training. So, you know, you need to really factor that in when you are putting those double days together, I guess. I'm talking about fueling for ultras. You know, do I need carbs? That's a great question. I get asked very often that one. You know, there's obviously a lot of discussion around fat burning and, you know, and not needing to have excessive amount of carbohydrates, and that's great. If you can become fat adapted, that's really quite useful. And I would always recommend that in training, that people do have some runs where they are fasted, so they help build that efficiency around processing those fats. However, I personally think that we should really be looking to get some carbohydrates in there, because it is the body's preferred method of fueling, and also the brain needs a lot of carbs as well to function clearly. You know, how many times have we seen maybe in a race a runner that's really struggling emotionally? You know, they're just having a bit of a breakdown, and if you sit them down and you can get some carbohydrates into that runner, you'll find he or she within 10, 15, 20 minutes will be in a completely different mental state. So often when we see a runner that's carb depleted, you'll see the first signs will be that their emotions start to go and they start making some bad choices. So I always say to runners, look out for those signs. You know, if you starting to think, hang on, I'm making some bad choices here, then maybe, you know, you need to put some extra carbohydrates into your run as you're going along there. And again, when it comes to fueling as well, it is about little and often. On all ultra runners, you're going to need a lot of calories to get you through that. You know, 50k, 100k, 24-hour and multi-day events, you're going to need a lot of calories to get you through that. But of course, we can't just sit down there and have a huge, great big meal. So it's about that constant grazing. Because if you try to put in 3,000 calories, you know, in your first aid break, you're going to find that actually you're going to really struggle. You're probably going to a food coma and sit down and never move again. So it's about that constant grazing, really, and making sure that, again, when we talk about the nutrition, that it's something you have tried in your training. So if your preferred method of fueling is pork pies or carbohydrate gels, or anything in between, you know, that you've tried and tested that in training as well, so that again you don't get no nasty surprises when it comes to your actual race day. So let's talk about some recommendations to try. And again, I'm flicking through these relatively fast because it is a relatively short session today. So when I'm talking about recommendations to try, really these first kind of 3 links at the top there, these are some links to where you can find some great ultra events to try. And the helpful links at the bottom, there's links to the International Trail Running Association website and the International Association of Ultra Runners. 2 good resources for ultra runners to have a look at. Gets lots of information about races coming up and various tips and things around that. When we talk about more those runners that are in the sharper end and looking for international vests, well, of course, you know, we run the Anglo-Celtic Plate every year. Unfortunately, it's just been postponed this year. It's now running again in September. It's normally running the first half of the year, usually sort of back end or early spring, depending upon when it's around. It's a 100k road race. That we always have an England representative team there of men and women, and there's qualification requirements on that, which you'll find at some links which you'll see later on in the website as I come down the webinar in a minute. And again, there's other options for GB vests around there, around the 50k World Championships, 100k World Championships, 24-hour World Championships, the Trail World Championships. Now, again, there is lots of different options available to competitive ultra runners out there as well. You know, and we look to try and get runners into the Anglo-Celtic Plate because we see that as a great sort of development and stepping stone opportunity for those competitive ultra runners out there, maybe looking to go on to hopefully qualify for an England or sorry, a Great Britain vest thereafter. So it's a good kind of stepping stone. So we'll kind of get into the end of this little bit. There's going to be some Q&A in a second. What's next? So again, this is the first in a series of ultra running focused webinars. Again, this one was just scratching the surface. In the subsequent ones, we're going to actually unpick some of these topics and go into greater detail. So there'll be sort of 2 or 3 slides where we're talking in a greater detail around about each individual component that we've kind of sort of glossed over today. So I recommend that you get onto those particular dates and get registered for them. There's also lots of online web development opportunities, online opportunities to get your knowledge base improved right now, because obviously in these current times now, you know, we're looking to put a lot of our content online. In relation to sort of what's next, I recommend that you visit the England Athletics coaching website for some more information around that. There's some great stuff on the Athletics Hub as well, which will enable us, you know, to have a look at the various sections of some coaching stuff. There's some great webinars. Obviously, there's this kind of stuff. There's other topics in the webinars as well. We're having a weekly regional coaching lead sort of Q&A session on a Friday evening for the foreseeable at the moment. So you can pop online, register to join those, and there'll be various regional coaching leads. Myself and Tom and a few others will be online to answer questions on those. So thanks for your patience on this one. We really have just rushed through it. So it's time to take some questions. So Spencer will drag them up for me in a second. And as they pop up, I will try to answer the questions as they come out. So Spencer, if you can do the honors and bring up some stuff for me. That'll say that there are any questions. There may not be. Okay. How can you pick runners for representative honours as some results may not be on the Power 10? Yeah, good question. So we make it quite clear on the requirements for the certainly for the Anglo-Celtic Plate and beyond. And a lot of it's based around things like marathon times or ultras, you know, 50k times, and I think there's a 100k time on there as well, and a 40-miler time. So that's the ones that we use at right now. Now this is something, you know, we've had some great debates around this over the last year or so, around about looking at how we may pick alternative results as well, because at the moment we're just focused primarily on marathon, 50k, 100k kind of results and 40 milers. But of course there's some other great events that runners out there do, such as Comrades, for argument's sake, and that's one that we don't currently use right now, but we are actively looking at other options that are available to us going forward. So great question. At the moment, I really get you, you know, that some of the results on it are not being on Power 10, and unfortunately some of those athletes may not get selected because of that, because we have as it is quite a strict criteria that we pick from And if an athlete's run a great performance that isn't under that criteria, unfortunately, we have to kind of stick to the criteria, because if we don't, then of course other athletes may challenge us and say, well, hang on a minute, I ran that 2:30 marathon, so therefore I should be getting picked ahead of runner X, who's not even done a 2:30 marathon in the last 2 years. So get you entirely. Would you recommend running a few ultramarathons before a few marathons? Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to do that. I'd say it's something I would recommend, because I think the jump from, say, a 5K, 10K, or a half marathon to an ultra is a huge jump. It's a real chasm. I think if you've run a few marathons, then you've probably got used to that feeling that I alluded to previously, where you get to that maybe 18 miles, 20 miles, 22 miles, and suddenly you're really struggling, the muscles are tired, the brain's tired, and you've got to push yourself through. So you get used to that feeling, and you probably don't experience that so much when you're doing the shorter distances. So the fear for me, for somebody maybe who hasn't run a marathon before and then goes on to the ultra marathon straight away, is he or she may have, say, done a 10K or a half marathon, never really experienced that overwhelming fatigue you get, then suddenly gets to race day and experiences that and really struggles. So it's something I would recommend, but of course not everybody follows the recommended pathway. So next question. Yeah, mental preparation, that's a great question, that, Kevin. So what are my thoughts on mental preparation as well as physical training? Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is something that's often overlooked. I like to think of it as callousing the mind. You know, we need to be able to get those athletes to find a way to intrinsically motivate themselves when the going gets tough. So, and that's where your mental training comes in there. Now, of course, how you do that depends upon how, you know, how well motivated you are from a mental process, really. I mean, some people are very good at intrinsically motivating themselves, and they just say, yeah, you know, I'm going to tough it through, and off they go, and they can just give themselves a quick mantra, you know, something like, I'm stronger, I'm going to get through this, and off they go. Whereas other people will really melt under that pressure. So it's definitely something that I recommend that people look at. And often what I would say to people is find something that makes you passionate about the race, and that needs to be your focus, really, and try to envision success. But also during your preparation, it's about also setting in your mind, what are you going to tell yourself, what are you going to say to yourself, what are you going to do when those bad moments come in. And in an ultra race, as in many races, you go through waves of where you're feeling great and then where you're feeling really bad. And it's having those athletes that have maybe pre-planned their process and their thoughts beforehand will probably have a more successful day than those that haven't. So definitely get some in if you can do, really. And maybe I'll put some more extra notes in my next presentation about that. But that's a great question, Kevin. Thank you. Do beards actually help? Well, I guess so. I mean, maybe you can store more gels on it. I don't know. Great question. The furthest I ran it is a marathon. Is 100K as the first ultra too much of a leap? Difficult question to say, Emma, really. I mean, a lot depends on your overall experience in running. So if you've already built up, you know, multiple years of running, and you've got multiple marathons, or you're used to training for long runs, then the jump to 100K shouldn't be too bad. However, if you've just done one marathon and you've been running for 2 or 3 years, then that might be a little bit of a bridge too far. It's really depends on how well you, I guess, make the adaptations to your training and how well you recover from your training. You know, it certainly is a big gap, a big jump. You know, when you're talking about 42K to 100K, you know, that is a big leap in distance and time on your feet. So ideally, I probably would recommend starting with a 50K or a 30 miler first. Certainly, that's where you could test yourself and experience the race and trial and error a little bit. It's easier to recover from a mistake on a 50 mile, on a 50K, as opposed to 100K. So you could do it, but it's not something I would particularly recommend. Okay. Would I recommend that sessions get more specific as they get closer? Yes, absolutely. Particularly for the more competitive athletes. I think if you're a novice ultra runner, you can probably just say, you know what, we're just really going to focus on time on our feet and building up that aerobic engine. But of course, if you're really more competitive, or if the race has got some additional components in there that maybe you don't experience in your training, so we talk about, say, maybe you're doing a trail race that's quite hilly and you live in a flat area. Of course, your training's been very non-specific at that stage. Then suddenly you come to race day and you're going to find that quite a challenge. So definitely think about the demands of the race, and maybe towards a back end before the taper, start bringing in factors that you may encounter on race day. So if it is a hilly trail race that you're running, make sure you're going to get plenty of hills in there. And I'd probably recommend actually starting it relatively early in your preparation for the actual race. And again, of course, if it's a flat race, it's a track race, you know, you might want to run a little bit on the track just to get used to the feeling of running in circles for a long period of time, and so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely need to get more specific as your training goes on. Yes, absolutely. So the question here is strength training as important for ultra marathon running as running training? Yeah, I would say so. Definitely, if you can get some strength training in there, you will benefit, because what's going to happen there, hopefully, it will make you a more robust athlete. So what does that mean? That means you should be able to cope with the demands of your training and your races in a better way, hopefully less likely to be injured. It doesn't guarantee you won't get injured, but it will mean that you're less likely to get injured and you'll be able to withstand those forces better. And also think about developing that sort of running form as well. So those, particularly if you're running trails and sort of hilly surfaces, you know, again, making sure that you're building those sort of fine motor skills. So doing some drills in there as well would really help with that as well. Okay, next question, if we've got any more. Let's have a look. I'm just waiting for Spencer. Okay, so Spencer's just commenting there. So excellent questions, everyone. We will look through these offline and try to incorporate them in the next few webinars. Exactly as Spencer says there. It's been a short one. Really, thanks for your time. Any questions that we haven't answered right now, we will pick them up in the future in the next webinar. So don't worry about that. If your question hasn't been answered, we will pick it up in the next webinar. Thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, going back to those previous links, look to register to the up and coming webinars where we will go into greater detail in individual components. But yeah, thanks for your time tonight, folks, and I hope you found it useful, and I will see you again online soon. And don't forget as well, there is sessions every Friday with the regional coaching leads, and these may not be experienced ultra runners, but they're certainly experienced endurance coaches that can give you lots of great advice around that. So look out for those as well, and maybe look to attend them as well. But thanks for your time.